And now we're going to hear, I think, changing gears a little bit from John Leland, Director of Strategy and Insights at Kickstarter, about new patrons program at Kickstarter, which is exciting. It's quickly become one of the most important engines, I think, of philanthropic support for documentary film. And it's something I think all of us can benefit from learning more about and getting more engaged with. So with that, I invite John to come up and join us.
Hi, I'm John Leland from Kickstarter. I'm the Director of Strategy, and I've been there for a little over 3 years now. I'd just like to thank Vince and the Media Impact Funders team for inviting me here and giving me an excuse to wear a suit. It doesn't happen very often. I'm usually wearing sneakers and jeans. So before jumping into this new program, which is really looking at ways that we can actually work with the foundation and institutional funding world, I'll just give you a little bit of background on Kickstarter, although I presume some rudimentary knowledge of what we do. So our mission is to help bring creative projects to life. That is, right now we primarily do that through crowdfunding, but that's actually a broader mission than just that funding piece. We are a public benefit corporation, so our legal mission is to support creative projects and independent creators in particular. We are the largest platform in the world for funding creative projects. And we really see ourselves as advocates for our users, for artists, filmmakers, creators of all kinds, really to preserve their creative independence and make sure that they can live a sustainable creative life. We serve about 2 million visitors every day. We have 12 million backers to date, and 275,000 filmmakers, artists, makers, and creators have funded on the site over the last 8 years. So our impact over that time has been rather remarkable of our community. About 10% of Sundance films over the last 6 years were funded on Kickstarter. 100 plus films at South by Southwest, 13 Academy Award nominees, but also music and publishing Grammy nominees and Hugo Award winners. I think people are pretty familiar with us impacting technology in certain ways because these things tend to blow up a little bit more. From like hoverboards, and people really like hovering things, hovering light bulbs. But also, I think the design component's actually really interesting, and recently we just got a permanent collection in the London Design Museum. A few years ago, we actually commissioned an independent study from a professor at UPenn, just to sort of figure out what the economic impact of all this is. So looking just at the US and just at the sort of direct economic impact of Kickstarter on the economy, he found that it led to more than 300,000 jobs, 115,000 creative projects brought to life, and more than $5.3 billion in just direct economic impact generated. But I'm here mostly to talk about film, and film's really at the core of what started Kickstarter and what we've always been. We've had more than 20,000 films successfully fund on the site, which is just a kind of an astonishing volume. We've had, I think, about 50,000 launch, 20,000 have successfully funded, 2.8 million backers of those projects, and more than $300 million raised. Yeah, I mean, so talking a little bit more about this, I mean, documentary really is the core of our film category. So about a quarter of those films were documentaries, and a third of all the money has gone to documentary films. And when you think about how crowdfunding works, that actually makes a lot of sense. Every documentary should have a community of interest that is interested in that piece, that you can reach out to and engage to help fund the work. So the future of film funding on Kickstarter. For us, that's partially working with you guys. So we are partnering with mission-aligned foundations and organizations to amplify their impact and improve access to institutional funding. We're calling the program for right now Patrons of Film, although that name may change. And really this is a response to a bunch of factors that we see as an opportunity for collaboration. First is just decreased funding, particularly for new filmmakers. The threats to the NEA and NEH are obviously very troubling, but just decreased private and public funds for first-time filmmakers. Traditional grant making, and this is actually a big part of it. traditional grant making, because for a variety of like very understandable reasons, is very inaccessible to most filmmakers, right? Like because of transaction costs, because if you open yourself up to the world, having to vet tons of film projects coming in the door is usually impossible for most organizations. And so they wind up doling out large sums of money to a few winners every year. And either they say that, and many times those organizations don't accept applications for that funding, which means that the people that get access to that funding are usually from positions of privilege, positions of access. And having that sort of system that benefits people with privilege and leaves most people without funding, access to that sort of funding, is something that we think we can help solve. In terms of access, a lot of our film community, particularly as you get higher up in quality, are people that come from communities of less access. So in narrative film, that's often the case. So I think two of the biggest films, or most important films that came out of Kickstarter that aired the last year were Gook, which was at Sundance this year, and Spa Night, which won the John Cassavetes Award at the Spirit Awards this past year as well. Those are both first-generation Asian American immigrants telling stories that don't get told if you're just going to LA and Hollywood and trying to get funding for your narrative film. And then to the extent that companies do play in this space, they put strings on it. So they'll require you to put their brand into the project or things like that, and that's entirely against our values as an organization. Creative independence is at the core of what we believe in. So I'll explain how the program works, and we're trying to make this as simple as possible. So establish a fund, which is really just the decision to do this. There's no transfer of money necessary to do that, and say what you want to be a patron of. So saying we want to be patrons of female filmmakers. We want to be patrons of impact documentaries about the environment. We want to be patrons of like sci-fi, fantasy, short films, whatever your organization is interested in supporting. We do want to find patrons as we launch this program that really cover some of the major areas like documentary, female filmmakers, different communities that we serve geographically and demographically. For foundations, that might mean working with a nonprofit intermediary. If you're funding, the way you can give funding is pretty restricted. So we're talking to, say, POV films about being an intermediary with a major foundation. So the foundation will do a block grant to POV, and then POV will administer the fund out on their behalf. And talk about why these films are important to you, what your criteria is, and set up a goal for the number of projects you want to support. Again, the goal here is I care less about the total sum of money available. I care more about how many films we can impact. So I'd rather have less money going to more films. I'll explain why and how this would work. So in terms of supporting projects and vetting and finding projects, we can do all the scouting. Like we have a huge, huge volume of projects coming through our site all the time, and we know what's on it. We are talking to these filmmakers, our film teams at all of the festivals, they talk to the film schools, and the quality projects, the really quality filmmakers that come through, we have relationships with. And so we're interested in like taking that burden off of any partners and being the matchmaker. So as a film project comes through our site, if there's a patron that aligns with what that filmmaker is doing or who that filmmaker is, we will pass it along to the partner and say, we think you should support this work. We think you should support this filmmaker. Here's why. Here's why we think that they're a good fit for you and what they're doing. And then we'll probably put in a recommendation of how much we think you should put into the campaign. So we'll generally be targeting this at 5 to 20% of their goal, which actually isn't that much money on a per project basis. So that's typically going to be like $1,000 to $5,000 per project. And if you give that much money outside of this ecosystem, it's probably not going to make much of a difference to a filmmaker. But inside of a campaign, that actually can make a huge difference, right? Because Kickstarter is an all-or-nothing funding platform, which means that for filmmakers on the site, if they have a goal of $30,000, if they are able to raise $20,000 during the 30-day campaign, they don't collect any of that money. So putting in 5 to 20% in a campaign, during the campaign, can help unlock that other 90% of funding. And it's not just the money in this case as well. It's also just that validation, momentum, and sort of good news to share. Being able, like having that happen in a campaign, and this is just the way campaigns work, is hugely impactful to a creator who's going through, who's having to do this like kind of major hustle, fairly stressful campaign, and being able to share that out mid-campaign as opposed to like, there's 17 days left, we need $12,000 more dollars, how are we going to do it? That news isn't very exciting to share, but being able to say, we just got funding from some foundation is actually really good news to be able to share. So it's up to the patron to choose what projects to support, right? We don't say who you need to be supporting. We're just playing matchmaker there with suggestions. If a patron decides to put money into a project, it'll say on the project page, patron funding from X Foundation. And we'll send obviously a message to the creator being like, congratulations, you received this funding. This is what the organization is. This is what they're looking to support, and you fit with that. And it's also an opportunity to provide additional assets, like digital assets that they can share. Again, that's actually very useful to the creator to be able to give them like, even just like an image of a badge they can share, as well as additional like opportunities, benefits, resources from the organization. From there, it's just about building relationships, and that can be as lightweight or as much of a lift as you want. Again, it's meant to be lightweight. The base level here is more about bringing institutional funding into giving more filmmakers access to it. But as we talk to partners for this, a lot of them are interested in offering additional benefits, resources, tools, mentorship. There's a Hollywood filmmaker who has his own production company that's going to do this, and he just wants to have a Facebook group with all of the filmmakers that he supports, right? Which sounds like a simple thing, but for a kid in Illinois who's made a short film, all of a sudden having a personal relationship with a Hollywood director is a really big deal. And having a community of filmmakers from across the world that they can talk to that are going through the same things is a really big deal. So things like that is just like, it's small, but it can make a huge impact. And finally, just showing the impact of that work, right? So we'll work with all of our partners to generate an impact report at the end of the year, probably. We haven't still figured that out. But really just trying to figure out, like, what is the impact of that kind of giving, right? Like, so, and that's not just the number of projects supported, it's what's the leverage of funding that you've sort of helped that creators unlock? How many backers have you supported alongside? Telling the stories of how these films have gone on to, whether festivals, distribution, whatever public impact has occurred because of these projects. Now, some of them do take a long time to pan out. It can be years. But that's just more opportunities to, like, A, tell stories out of those projects and to help those filmmakers on their journey. Again, it also, if the company is interested in acquiring or distributing or promoting those films, it puts you in a position to do that. But this funding is no strings attached for any partner. So we don't allow any patron to put requirements on the funding in this model. So we're really structuring this in a way that's meant to be high impact, right? Leveraging Kickstarter to support dozens of films and unlock sort of multiples of value, right? Not requiring patrons to do the vetting or the scouting, but opening them up to a world of thousands of filmmakers and films every year, while using small amounts to unlock more money. High visibility, I mean, this will be one of the bigger public initiatives that we've ever done as a company. We obviously have a fairly large microphone to play with, and every project that a patron supports will show that on the project page. High opportunity just in terms of being able to connect with really amazing filmmakers very early in the process at a time when they need help probably the most. It's one of the more stressful things a filmmaker can do, to be honest, is go through a campaign like this, because it's pretty high stakes and requires a lot of them. And then low investment. I mean, I think a lot of times we're looking for the amount of money that a foundation might put into one film in a year, and putting that instead into 25, 50 films. So if you're interested, please find me during one of the breaks or at the reception afterwards. We're pretty flexible in this. We're still figuring it out as we go. So I'm trying to understand the needs of like the foundation community and how we can structure ourselves to best fit with you guys. It seems like every foundation is structured differently, which is great. Slow moving and structured differently. It's you guys don't make it easy. But I think hopefully you understand what we're trying to do here, right? Like I think there are some structural inefficiencies, right? Totally understandable structural inefficiencies in the way the foundation community currently operates. And the question is there an opportunity for us and working together to address some of those structural inefficiencies? So we're open. We do tend to move fast, just so you know. And we'll be looking to launch this initiative later this year, probably in late summer, early fall. And so we're collecting the sort of founding patrons and partners that we want for that launch now. That's it.